Hi, my name is Evan Sanchez, and I'm the Educator Support Manager here at the Science Penguin. We get a lot of questions about how do you structure a class whenever you may have 30 minutes, maybe just 45 minutes, or if you're a lucky few that get the 60 or beyond, how do you structure the science block? That's a great question, and I want to give you some great tips and tricks on what you can do to truly maximize the amount of time that you have with your students so that they gain as much material as possible with the time that you have. So let's go ahead and take a look. So here are 5 things that I want you to consider whenever you're planning your 30, 45 minute, or even 60-minute block. What may take you 10 minutes to do might take your students a bit longer, so knowing that you have to be a bit flexible. Having those clear procedures in place and assigning student jobs is going to really maximize your time. Having a plan for 5 to 10 minutes of your end of your block for some form of closure. I always like that time for journaling, something to reflect on, an exit ticket, so that way I knew where my students were in their learning process and where we needed to guide the instruction for future days. Making sure that you have everything you need ready and on hand, whether it be lab materials, papers that your students are going to be interacting with, or even supplies that they may need in order to make that time efficient. Finally, always planning a couple of minutes as well for your students to clean up and get things ready so that way for the next class, it's also set up to go. So let's think about ways that we can maximize our time. So over the course of my teaching, these were typical time wasters. Passing out papers such as handouts and notes that my students would need. If we were going to be using interactive notebook materials, I always noticed that it took so long for my students to trim out certain things. Transitions, going from one thing to the next, took a while, as well as cleaning up and getting ready for the next class to come through. So I had to think of ways to counteract that so I can maximize my time. One thing that I did is making sure that students were grabbing papers on their way in. If we had notes going on for that day, if we were going to have an interactive notebook activity, they would pick those things up on their way to their seats. If I knew we were going to be using materials in our interactive notebook, especially if it had little spots where it had little doors that would open, I would go ahead and just pre-cut those materials ahead of time to maximize the time where they only had to glue it in their journal after we completed what we needed to. For my transitions, timers as well as different class chants were what maximized my time. I cannot stress it enough about timers. If you tell them you have 2 minutes to do this and you set it, you can even do it as a competition for even a classroom management reward system. It was great. And then also taking the time, instead of me doing all the cleaning up or prepping for the next class, getting and designating students for those types of jobs so that way I could free up my time to work with students that I needed to, and they could take that responsibility on. So whether you're a brand new teacher or even a veteran teacher, I always suggest having a slide up for your students whenever they come in through the door. The routine is going to be really nice for them to know, okay, this is exactly what I do each and every day when I come into the classroom. I love these templates from slidesmania.com because they're free and you can customize them however you want. I loved adding visuals to my directions a lot of times so that way my students who were trying to just read through the screen really quick knew, oh, okay, I do need to get my folder and my notebook, so we didn't waste more additional time. I would set the timer on the right side. I would add that timer inside of my slide and I would put it for about 8 minutes. That gave my time for my kids to work through the problem, do what they needed to do. I'm going around the room, lapping and seeing how they're doing with that question. And then when the timer went off, we had about 2 minutes where we would just kind of discuss. I'd have students that I really liked seeing whatever they had shown in the work to come up to the board or discuss with the classroom about these things. Did it take some time to get this established? Absolutely. So make sure that you take that time to model the right way, the wrong way, and then the right way again when they come into the classroom. So I would have some students come in and they would start with step 3 and my kids would have to tell me, What did they do wrong? Oh, they didn't do step one. They didn't drop their things off, or they didn't get their notebook first. And so when you make that a habit, they will have a great establishment to get your day started really well. So here's a little glimpse of my classroom when I was teaching in 5th grade. I'm going to give you some organization tips. On the first picture on the left, you're going to notice that I had some crates on there. In my final year in 5th grade, we went down to 3 teachers, so I had to teach both science and social studies, but on a normal year when we had 4 teachers, I had 4 periods of science. So I would have 4 blue crates in the back. My students would keep their journals in there at all times. I had them sometimes take it home if they wanted to study for a test, but mostly we just kept them within the classroom so that way there was no problem of them getting lost. To the right side of the crates, you're going to notice a stack of green folders. The green folders are where my students would keep their spiral reviews or warm-ups that we would use within the school year on one side, and on the right side of the pocket, we would put things like data sheets of trackers, SMART goals, things of that nature. And if you're interested to know how I used my spiral reviews, we did do a blog post about that previously that you can check out, and you can see a video all about that. In this video right here, you're going to notice that I have this table. So before the period would be coming to class, I'd designate a person to come and grab the journals, and they would place them on the table for the students that would be coming in. The rest of my class, usually they took care of their own selves by putting their journal up before the end of the period, as well as their green folder. And the biggest thing was making sure that everything looked nice and neat before they left. In the middle right here, I had little caddies that I would use in my classroom whenever we needed to use it for glue bottles. Maybe we were going to use dry erase markers for whiteboards. And I kept it very organized, and teams were in charge of making sure they had all their supplies. So I would name them like Team Awesome, Brilliant, Courage. And so they would know which team they were with their supplies. And then finally, what I want to show you is at my horseshoe table, a lot of times, yes, that's where my small group was happening, but at the beginning of class, when I would put up my slide and I would say, go grab your green folder, I would have the folders here, and sometimes there may be some notes or handouts. A lot of times I may have put another little desk or table for handouts that they would need. So that was really easy. They got in, they got what they needed, and they got straight to work. So those are just some of my easy ways to kind of keep things organized in the classroom. So we're going to look at some schedules of 60-minute, 45-minute, and 30-minute blocks just to give you some ideas or just suggestions, because as we know, not every school is going to operate the same. Our students are going to be at different mastery levels at different points, and sometimes our lessons take a little bit longer than we expected. So I taught a 60-minute block when I was teaching in 5th grade, and these were some scenarios that I would use whenever I was structuring my day depending on what we were covering. So for instance, sample 1 was a great one to use whenever I had a 10-minute warm-up. We do a mini lesson that might have included some interactive notebooks, some guided practice for about 20 minutes, and then I would give some time for station, small group, independent practice. Now remember, if I needed a little bit more time for note taking or something of that nature, I might have had to trim a little bit there. I also, again, gave about 10 minutes for that closure, my exit tickets, and cleaning up to get ready for the next class. On lab days, you can see that I did my 10-minute warm-up, about a 40-minute lab, and then I also did about a 10-minute closure and cleaning up, because labs will take some time to clean up. And on my campus, I was very fortunate to have a STEM lab. So I would have to take my students down to the STEM lab. My STEM lab manager would have my materials ready to go on each of the tables, and then I would have to have that transition time to come back. So that's where I gave 10 minutes. But again, you can adjust it to your needs. Sample 2 is a great one for if you've already taught your lesson, maybe you just need to do a quick little recap and you want them to do a little bit more guided practice, independent practice. You can even do more time for small group and stations and a closure. In sample 3, I liked that one when I needed, maybe they needed a catch-up day. My kids needed that. or maybe I really just wanted them to work in stations, or we had task cards that I wanted them to go around in the hallways to work through. I wanted a lot more time for that. So these were just some various samples, because we know that not every day you're teaching a new lesson. I try to make that happen with these examples. Now, some things that you see beneath those examples are extra time savers. So let's say you're a self-contained teacher. Maybe you can work into where your students could complete the warm-up as their morning work before they come to class. The nice thing too about our spiral reviews is they only have 4 questions each week. So for instance, on a lab day, I may not have used time for a warm-up because I needed more time to get the lab done, because my time in the lab was only limited to that one day. And so that is a nice thing too, to know that if there's just a day that you cannot get that warm-up in, you have that flexibility of 1 time a week. I try to do it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but you have that flexibility. Let's look at a 45-minute block. Kind of the same situation. You can change your warm-ups to go shorter if you need to, but I try to allot 10 minutes. You've got a 15-minute mini lesson, 10-minute station small group independent practice, and then a 10-minute closure cleanup. Again, all of that can be adjusted. This is just some ideas. Lab days, same situation, warm-up, lab time, closure, exit ticket. Especially with that 45-minute block, that may be a day that you cut a warm-up if you needed to, if you're using spiral reviews. Sample 2 is a good one. Again, you've already taught the lesson, do a quick recap, get more into that guided independent practice, and then go through stations and small groups to pull those students that you need. And sample 3 is those days, again, like I mentioned, for a catch-up day. You can do your small groups, stations, more so, and then have that closure as well. Now, for those that teach maybe just a 30-minute block, I understand that. I taught 3rd grade prior to 5th grade, and so we had about 30 to maybe 40 minutes, but with those little ones, it did take a lot of time to transition. So these were some of my samples that I used. Sample 1, a quick warm-up if you choose to do one. You can have a lesson, guided practice from 8:05 to 8:25, and then a quick little closure. Sample 2, that's more of a day to go ahead and get stations, independent practice. Maybe you want to pull small groups with your closure, just 5 minutes I'm allowing on those. And then on lab days, quick warm-up, or you can take that warm-up out. On the lab days, I would have to usually do it on multiple times. So maybe on day 1, ask questions, make a hypothesis, make a plan. Day 2, get started with the lab right away, collect the data. Day 3, analyze it, make tables, draw conclusions. So just know that with lab days, you may need a little bit more than just one day. Now, since I did teach writing and reading and math, I did try to find ways that I could trade time with another subject if I could. So for instance, if I really needed that science lesson in, I could do 60 minutes on Monday, and then on Tuesday, I just didn't do science. So I would really try to find ways also to integrate science with a reading teacher or a writing or math or technology when possible. Even when I was in 5th grade, I would talk to my reading teacher, and she might have had the students assess on some sort of reading passage about matter that was aligned to what we were learning at that moment. So it was great because they were getting exposure of science there. Maybe I can move on to something different. And we also could take grades for each other. I'd say, hey, just send me that grade whenever you have that, since it's science related to what we're doing. So a way to really get your teams involved. Now, typical weekly schedule. I kind of wanted just to add this too of how I structured my week. So for 5th grade, when I taught there Monday through Thursday, I try to get all my spiral review questions done for their warm-up, 1 problem a day. Tuesdays and Wednesdays, I try to incorporate the lab, station type work. Thursdays and Fridays, it just depended on the week and what we were covering. I liked a lot of times to try to get assessments on Thursdays and vocabulary quizzes on those days. So that way on Friday, I could talk to them about their assessments, or we needed to kind of do a data analysis on it to see what our strengths and weaknesses were. Or if Friday was just better for those days, that's when we would do that. Fridays, a lot of times too, if I wasn't ready for an assessment or vocabulary quiz, that might have been a day for us to catch up on something, giving them catch up time. Or me even meeting with students more so small group for that period and giving my other students more extension type things that were ready to go with mastery. When I taught third grade, when I was self-contained, I taught only 3 days worth of science. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays were dedicated to science, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays were social studies. But again, if I could find ways that I could integrate science into my reading lesson or something with writing, with maybe a claim, evidence, reasoning type of situation, I at least was covering science in multiple bands of what I taught to make it work. So hopefully this was helpful for you to give you kind of an idea how to do a schedule for yourself and how to organize your classroom. And if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to give us an email and I will be more than happy to help you out.